Senator Cassidy, you're now recognized for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. Let's just be clear. Everybody on this panel cares about the high cost of prescription drugs and wants to work on real solutions to address this. But it's also clear that this hearing is not about finding legislative solutions. It's kind of following a formula. We publicly attack private, well, I don't, but others, publicly attack private citizens for being successful under capitalism. We grossly oversimplify a problem and blame corporations. We demand CEOs come before the committee for public verbal stoning. We reject the offer to send top executives with subject matter expertise and responsibility regarding the issues at hand and threaten a subpoena when CEOs are suspicious that they won't get a fair shake. Hold the hearing, get sound bites, then pick another set of CEOs for a show trial, but we don't pass meaningful legislation. If that sounds familiar, it's been the hearing with Starbucks founder Howard Schultz, Moderna CEO Stefan Bancel, and now this hearing with the same formula. I would have gladly joined the chair in exploring solutions to address the high cost of prescription drugs. I'm a doc. I worked in a public hospital for the uninsured for 25 years. I did my best to get care to those who otherwise would not have received. I am aware of this. I'm also aware of the perverse incentives, the kind of like, my gosh, it shouldn't be high, but it is high. Bad actors game the system, and we need solutions that benefit patients and improve access. But the majority was not interested in working with this side of the dais to hold a serious hearing to inform serious legislation. They didn't seek Republican input. The goal was to haul you guys in, to cry capitalism and blame these corporations for the high cost of drug prices. Now, by the way, of course drug companies play a role. And hopefully we'll get answers today to legitimate questions about how drugs are priced. But the problem is far greater and more complex than individual companies, or even a set of companies within an ecosystem which is incredibly complex. Why do Americans pay more for certain drugs than patients in other countries? To understand, we need to have a serious effort to navigate the network of perverse incentives throughout the healthcare system. I lived in it for 25 years. I am very kind of aware of it. Taking a substantive look at insurance benefit design, price transparency, regulatory barriers, intellectual property barriers, the perverse effect government discount programs have upon prices charged to commercial patients, etc. One example, just to say, again, a little bit of complexity here. The 340B drug program resulted in a $54 billion in drug discounts in 2022. But we actually don't know if those discounts lowered prices for the patient who bought the drug. There are reports that patients paid cash when the intermediary took the full price, even though 340B should have lowered it. That is a serious investigation being conducted by this side of the dais that the other side of the dais was not interested in participating in. That is an understanding of an ecosystem. I understand there's no one more eloquent than Chair Sanders on Medicare for all. And we can cherry pick examples of how other countries are doing something better. I could cherry pick the opposite. Canada is struggling, just to show you that there's a complexity here, let me just take an example. Canada is struggling with specialty care. In May of last year, the Canadian government began to send 4,800 Canadians from British Columbia to Washington State to, quote, ensure people have faster access to life-saving radiation treatment, end quote. They can afford their system because we're right next door. Relatedly to this hearing and to that, Alison Decluseau, a Canadian woman, paid for her own treatment in the United States after the Provincial Health Authority in British Columbia denied her access to life-saving chemotherapy. Canada had a lower-cost drug so low they didn't carry the chemotherapy. So she paid for it out of pocket in the United States so she could have life-saving chemotherapy. The United States is not perfect, but if we cherry-pick from other countries, we have to do a more thorough investigation to see is there a balance there. Now let's return to prescriptions. Canadians pay less than we do. Let's figure out why. But let's also point out that public health insurance in Canada only covers 21% of newly developed drugs. Now, maybe that's a trade-off, but I can tell you, you tell an American that they can't have access to a life-saving drug, they're going to see you in court. They're going to sue, and they're going to say, I want that access. The UK only covers 48% of newly available drugs. Americans just would not tolerate that. It's fair to say that Ms. Decluseau, or those radiation treatment patients, or those not getting the newly developed life-saving drugs as quickly, might die in those countries that don't have access to the same treatments as do we in the U.S. These are serious questions. One more time, I'm a doc. I am aware of this. But we need to fully consider all these issues and then maybe bring you in at the end. But we'll bring in with a context which is complete as opposed to isolated. As I said at the start, it would be best if this were a genuine exercise. I am so willing to do the work on this, as are my colleagues. We've shown that willingness on work on PBM reforms and generic drugs. And even though the chair and I got off to a rocky start, we did some pretty good work on that, Mr. Chair. I think we've got some good bipartisan legislation. So this committee, I agree with you, can accomplish that. But I don't want the committee to devolve into a CEO whack-a-mole that ends up with no serious legislation as a result. Further proof of what I consider the unserious and cynical nature of this hearing is that the minority asked the chair to have a witness on the panel that could actually explore some of these issues side by side these CEOs. That was turned down. We wanted an academic expert in drug pricing who could provide unbiased and substantive input to the issues at hand. Our witness was not allowed. He'll be on the next, but the way this works is this gets all the publicity and the next one gets crickets. And so we've not had that opportunity. And I'll also point out we didn't split the majority and minority witnesses into different panels during several hearings which promoted kind of labor union issues. I can think of no reason to not allow our witness to be here now, except perhaps ruining the optics. As I said at our last markup, what ends up being hollow messaging gives DC a bad reputation. Folks want real answers. They want relief from high prices. It is in part what we're going to hear today, but it will be separated from a context that would have made it a lot more productive. If you're telling voters you're going to do something when you know at the get-go you'll have no legislative solution which emerges, and that's why folks don't trust. So if we're just looking for a social media clip, then I suppose we've accomplished something. But let's make a difference for the people whom we represent, for those patients in hospitals where I once treated who otherwise would not have access to care. We have the ability to craft meaningful legislation. Let's do it. With that, I yield.